Hello, what's up guys? My name is Mindglowing and today we're gonna create this epic animation of a crystallized abstract man. All you need will be linked down in the description, so make sure to follow the rest of the video and I hope you learned something today. We are going to use Das 3D because of its free figures. Once you download the software, which is free, you can go to figures and we're going to use the Genesis 8 male. You need a bridge to the Blender. It's an add-on. Once you installed it, you can make sure you click here and then it's either scripts and then Das to Blender or file send to Das to Blender. Just click accept and OK. So go to Blender now and make sure that the Das to Blender add-on is installed here as well. And you can find it over here when you press N on the keyboard. And let me enable these shortcuts. So N on the keyboard, and let's delete this first and import new Genesis figure. There we go. So all we need to do is, let's delete this as well. All we need to do is give it our own pose. So Control Tab to go into pose mode, and let's give this a pose of your choice. Just make sure you rotate these limbs. This can be a tedious process. Move stuff around until you are satisfied, and I'll see you in a bit. So once you're happy with the pose, the next step is to change our camera, and let's go into object mode first by pressing Control Tab or going here to object mode, press on the camera, and I already have set this up for my preferred pose. So let's just change this. What I want to make sure is that this camera has a focal length of 40. As you can see, the hand is coming into our camera, and let's see this. It's a bit of an interesting camera angle because of these rotations here. You can even exaggerate with it. Just make sure your pose has an increasing depth to it. And I've done that with the hand, so it's more interesting. Next step is to give these a shader, and they already have a shader. Import it from Das. So we want to change this because right now everything is separate, as the lips, teeth, torso, and so on. So let's click on the lips, the second one, and hit the minus button until you get to the pupils, and then do the same thing. So go to the next one and minus. So what this did is merge all these to face and to pupils. And let's change the shader as well, because right now it's different from cycles in Eevee, but we're going to set this to all. And let's do the same for the pupils. It's to all. And let's set this to an emission of 50. Like that. Let's see how this does. Let's change cycles to Eevee and enable these. Make sure you change the bloom settings a bit to your liking, something like that. The settings for now. So let's change our skin texture. So let's go to the face. This is going to be a rather complex texture, and let's start with our base color. We need two principal BSDFs. Let's start with the first one. Let's change this to a bit of slight purple, and let's give it metallic 1 roughness 1. And actually it's quite hard to see what we're working with, so let's change this to the wall tab and add an environment texture. So we can plug in an HDRI. You can choose any HDRI that you like, it doesn't have to be the same one. And let's do a little trick here, because right now you can see the HDRI in the background, which is not what we want. So let's add another background node and mix these two and add a light path node. Set the camera ray to the factor, and as you can see, our HDRI is still affecting it or figure, but the background is gray right now. So let's change this to black. I don't want to see all of these bones, so what we can do is press on this little arrow and click deselect the bones. Let's go back into our object shader and let's check our second principled BSDF. Let's change this to pretty dark gray, almost black. And let's change this to metallic and 0 roughness. Let's mix these two. Let's add a layer weight node and a color ramp to control it, and this time we're going to plug in our facing into the factor and the color into the factor. Let's move up this to 0.3, something like that. It's nicely affecting our figure. Going to Control J and F2 to change the name to base color. We're going to mix this with a bunch of different stuff. So what we're going to do now is add a factor, which is a noise texture that we're going to use with a layer weight to 0.45. Set the factor into the color into the normal, set this to 4D, and we're going to animate this later on. Detail to 0. Use a color ramp to control this, and this time we're going to set the Fresnel to the factor. Alright, let's change this to noise. This is going to be our factor with a second color that we're going to use. Let's add an emission node with a color ramp. And we're going to mix these two so we can see what we're doing, and set this color into the factor. Into the surface. Able to see what we're doing here. So let's change these colors into a cyan blue. Just choose your own colors, mess around with it. Right, we're going to control this even more with a color ramp. Color into the factor and a noise texture. And the noise texture, enter into the factor. Control T to map this and set the object to the vector instead of generate it. Let's change this to 4D, and later on we'll animate this W. Change scale 11.5. Let's change the ramp here. Right, let's set this emission to 50. We'll change this later on. See in here, change this. It's going to be interesting. Let's change this to base color. And we're going to do this one more time, but with a Voronoi texture. This to animate station later on. It's to 4D.033. Scale to 10. And add color ramp. Bit. That. And set the distance to the factor. Change this to distance to edge. And mix these two again and set the color to the factor. Change this to Voronoi. And even more, and change this to object instead of generated. Right, that's interesting. Now that we have all the effects, just change the values a bit until you're satisfied enough. Now let's animate this, bring in our timeline and set the end frame to 120. Going to animate our noise texture. So I, to add a keyframe, go to 121. I again. And we'll do the same for a rotation of our Voronoi. Set this at 1, my mistake. 0, so it's 5. Then our noise texture. Now let's go to frame 60. Just to 120. Let's rotate the x-axis by 2.65 and press I. And this 0.3 and I. Now we can see a nice animation going on. The next thing we should do is bring in some lights. So let's do that. Shift A, point light into the middle and change the radius to 100. Just to purple. Or choose your own color. 2500 watts. It's going to bring in that roughness that we took before. Something like that. Let's duplicate this and bring it to the back. Set this to 1000. Change it to a bit more purple. And bring in an area light and rotate it until sets global, rotate on the z-axis and make sure it's facing towards our character. I'm going to set this to 500 watts and a very slight purple, close to white. Just mess around with the location of the lights a bit until you're satisfied enough. It's a bit hard to see right now, but I placed them in these locations. Now that we have our lights, let's move on to our background. So Shift A and add plane. Bring it to the back, rotate it, and let's scale it up. Have to be aligned perfectly. Make sure it's in the back enough. Right. What I did for this is use an AI. I generated an image texture that is some kind of nebula effect. But let's bring that in. So what I did was change the hue and saturation to 0.3 so it matches all color of our figure, and I animated this as well. So I animated the z-axis, so frame 121 I, and at the 0 I, and then in the middle at frame 60 it was about 6, something like that, and press I. Alright, that's exactly what we want. Next is to animate our character. So, but let's bring back in the bones. Press on the rig. And right now if you press on the R for rotation, it's not going to do anything. So that is because they are locked. This is a thing from the import of DAS. So make sure that you unlock these first, so now you can rotate the character. It's rotated in the z-axis. So same thing again, frame 0, Z, frame 0 at 121, framed 121 and 0 again. Now move to the middle and change this to -5 maybe. Yeah, -5 is good. There we go. So everything is moving a bit around. Don't need the bones anymore. So I forgot to change this to B-spline. Change this to black. 2.7, something like that. Be a bit more grey. In that blue bit more. We want to go to color management and change the look to medium in high contrast. Something like that. The next step is to create some crystals that we're going to put all over his skin. So let's create these crystals first. Go to mesh, icosphere, and let's change this to subdivisions 1. Going to use the / key on the numpad so we can focus on this alone. All I'm going to do is go into edit mode, click on a vertex, Control Shift B. That's what I'm going to do all over the place. Make it a more interesting shape. What we can do as well is we can press O. This enables this proportional editing, and we can, if we use the scroll wheel, we can make it bigger, change it a bit, make sure there are variations. Control Shift B again. Let's choose these two. Press C, it limits itself. Just make sure it's something interesting. There we go. And I'm going to make 3 of these and add them to a collection crystals, and I'll see you in a bit. So I created 3 of these, and let's add a shader to them. So I found this interesting diamond glass shader, and let's just add this to all crystals. So add a new shader. And let's add 3 glass PSDFs. Mix the first 2 and this one like that. We need 2 value nodes, one set to 2.418 and the other two 0.325. Going real fast because this already has been covered into another tutorial. add a math node, set this to subtract. I'll link down the original tutorial in the description. So let's add this, subtract to our IOR of the first one, and the roughness should be at 0.01 for all of these. Set this value to the IOR of the second one, and this one to the second value, like this, and back to the IOR again. And we're going to use some different colors. Set this to a bit of cyan, like that, and a bit of purple. Just give me an interesting kind of shader. So what we can do is we change the name first, last diamond, and what we do is we add these to the other two, but we're going to change these ones a bit. So going to change the color slightly. Right, and change these colors for all of your different crystals so you have a bit of variation. You can create as many crystals as you want, and we'll go into geometry nodes then, and then we're going to scatter these around the figure. So we want to make sure that these 3 crystals are in a separate collection, M, and then new collection, and then crystals. This is going to be important when we're going to add our geometry nodes. So the slash on the num key, on the numpad again, to bring everything back, and you can see these crystals lying around here, we don't need them. Let's add, we click on our body, let's go to geometry nodes and create a new one. So we want to add a join geometry node. We want to keep our body. So let's add a distribute points on faces. Let's plug in the geometry into our mesh, and then instance on points. Let this the points into the points, and then instance into the join geometry. We're going to bring in our crystal collection. Is this as our instance? Going to set this to bus on disk, and going to use our texture weight paint. So how can we do that? First of all, we need a new group. Let's rename this to crystals. And when we plug in this into our selection of our instance on points, what we can do is press on this icon here, and then we can find our crystals that we just created. And what does this do right now, you may ask? We go to weight paint. Right now it's completely blue. So what does that mean? It means that nothing is going to get scattered. But once we add some stuff, as you can see, they are coming into they are coming on to the place where you paint. And if they're not, that is because our density is set at only 10. We're going to set this at 2000. And set the minimum distance to 3. Alright, let's tweak this a bit. So let's add some right now just to see them. So what we're going to do right now is add random value nodes to control the rotation and the scale. But first of all, we need to set this to relative and separate children's, reset children, and make sure the spic instance is enabled. Let's add in the transform node to scale these down first, because they're way too big right now. Here we go. And if we didn't enable this, it would just give us rows of crystals, because they are set into this little row right now. So it's going to just take this as one object instead of all different ones. Okay, so let's tweak these settings a bit. And a value to the scale. And just play around with this until you're satisfied enough with the result. Alright. And there we go. It's looking very nice. And just make sure you add in some. And what you can do is can click here on subtract, then remove some parts and just make something that looks interesting. So I'll just tweak this a bit and see you in a bit. Right, so as you can see, I changed it a bit on the arms as well as on the head and here on the zip. So when we go to the rendered view and we go into object mode, we can see all crystals. And in the animation, the HDRI is going to affect these crystals, which is rather nice.